Okay, hi everybody. It's Michael Shermer. It's time for another episode of the Michael Shermer Show. I am the publisher, as you recall, of Skeptic magazine. Here's our latest issue you can get at skeptic.com on nationalism matters, keeping with our new redesigned and thematic issues. The previous one was on race matters, and then abortion matters, and then our first one of the year was on trans matters. This year in 2023, we're going to be taking on education and health and energy and economic money matters. So check us out. Give us your support there at skeptic.com/donate. Okay. My guest today is Elle Hardy. She's a journalist and foreign correspondent who is reported from the United States, the former USSR, and North Korea. Ooh, we have to talk about that for sure. Among a long list of places. Her work has appeared in GQ, Lonely Planet, Foreign Policy, and Business Insider, and on ABC Australia, where she lives at least part-time, as I understand it. You're also in the UK periodically, and even in America sometimes. Her new book is this, Beyond Belief, How Pentecostal Christianity is Taking Over the World. Taking over the world, Elle, oh my God, it's the end of the world.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. Hey, it's just been happening under the radar, and that's really why I wrote the book. I don't think a lot of people knew that this, religion that's only, really a bit over 100 years old is going to have about 10% of the world adhering to it by 2050.
Yeah, I saw that in your data here. Pentecostalism has 600 million followers. If the trend continues by 2050, there'll be 1 in 10 people worldwide. How do you know? What's the source of data on that?
Look, there's people far smarter than myself, but some of this comes from Pew, I believe, who really are the gold standard in that kind of religious stuff. And it is a broad umbrella, but this is a huge trend, and there certainly is. A lot of this explosion is happening in the developing world. So places like sub-Saharan Africa, where just by virtue of population, some of this stuff is occurring as, people are being born into families who are Pentecostal and who, will almost become Pentecostal from birth.
Right. So you have the kind of the growth of religion through fecundity and conversion. I mean, that's really the only two ways to grow a religion, right? So, they have a lot of babies.
Yeah, well, and the thing is, you don't convert atheists. You convert people who already believe, and that's really the other huge part of the successful growth of Pentecostalism has been converting Catholics in Latin America. It's sweeping through like wildfire. Almost as we speak in Brazil, the Pentecostals are going to be outnumbering Catholics quite possibly this year in Brazil, which is pretty wild. They've undone 500 years of Catholic faith in 40. So it's a really huge phenomenon, and the estimates are converting about 35,000 people a day. So when you think of that's a couple of basketball arenas of people every day who are being born again. So it's not just a birth phenomenon for sure.
Yeah, that's astonishing because I know some Mormons who have gone on their missions, and some Jehovah's Witnesses who go out knocking door to door. And as I understand it, also from studies, that conversion rates there are pretty low. It's hard to talk people in at their front door if they even open the door for you to changing religions or joining a completely new religion. So, what is their method that seems to work better than other religions?
Sure. So really, what's getting people in the tent is health and wealth. So it's the promises of a better life. This is the faith of the world's working poor. So it is that sense of community. It is, sometimes wealth by prosperity gospel, or just the fact that the people that go to Pentecostal churches tend to see a bit of an uplift in their circumstances, whether it's, kicking the drink or just having a community around you who might help support your small business a bit more. That's certainly a very profound thing. And then health. So healthcare by miracle, by, laying hands and all that kind of stuff that Pentecostals are pretty good at. But also some very basic support services in, South Africa, Brazilian favelas, all these kinds of places, just having a small medical clinic at your church that's probably staffed by, volunteered by some doctors. And it's not just Pentecostals that do this, other churches and religious organizations might as well, but there just is something about having this greater sense of community and people having that born again moment, perhaps being a bit more committed to their everyday lives. Like I said, stopping drinking and drugs and things like that is a very big part of it. So people just tend to get their lives together and see things lift up once they become Pentecostal. And and they really see that clear demarcation as well because of that born again moment, because of taking the plunge quite literally, in full water immersion baptism, and then being born in the Holy Spirit, starting to go to church every Sunday. People remember their lives before and after, and they see that moment, and then they talk about it a lot. And that's really a huge part of the growth is other people saying, oh, he's got his life together because he went to church. Maybe I'll go to church this weekend. And that's how it really grows.
Interesting. So there's a pragmatic explanation for its appeal. It changes people's lives. You hear that a lot in conversion stories and testimonials when Christians witness. I was down and out. I was, drinking, gambling, and whatnot. And now my life is better. What's wrong with that? Nothing, I guess, in a way. Although, for a secularist, it's like, yeah, but you got to buy all the other stuff, all the woo-woo stuff.
Yeah. Look, and like anything, I mean, you get 600 million people, you're going to have, absolute saints and absolute charlatans. And that's certainly, what the book tries to cover. There are some wonderful people in these churches and some absolutely horrible people as well. And I mean, obviously there's the spiritual nourishment as well. Pentecostalism is very spiritual, probably in a way that we're not as accustomed to in the West. It's about the Holy Spirit entering you and feeling, the power of speaking in tongues and other things like that. It's very spiritual. It even appeals to a lot of, we can talk about it some more, but it appealed to a lot of ex-hippies in the 60s and a lot of people who might call themselves spiritual but not religious. Because it has that very sort of independent, I suppose you'd say, very individual form of faith that it doesn't have to be, getting directives from the Vatican on how you're going to do things. It's kind of what feels good and looks good in the local community. And that's another really, really big thing that Pentecostal churches can vary quite a lot from country to country because they look and feel like the local conditions, and that authentic nature is really important to people.
Yeah. Before we get into it, let me just ask you your personal story, because you're an interesting journalist, has lived all over the world and traveled, and so you're sort of an embedded journalist in these churches, which I find just incredibly interesting. Every chapter is a fascinating story that begins with one of these first-person accounts. There I was at this place in this country, and so on. What got you interested in that? I heard or read somewhere you were raised Catholic, but not super serious Catholic, I guess, and you at some point, I guess, abandoned that, and now you're an agnostic or whatever you call yourself.
Yeah, I'd say broadly agnostic. Was raised Catholic, but when my grandfather died when I was about 10, Mum said we don't have to go to church anymore on Sundays. So like a lot of people, I think I had that sort of vaguely religious upbringing. But yeah, I got interested in the book. I was actually living in the United States and was doing a story in Waco, Texas, which is one of the chapters of the book about the John School movement. So the rehabilitation schools for men caught soliciting prostitutes. And I was down in Waco, embedded with this church, and they didn't really want me around, but they kind of had me anyway. And so I sort of worked out after a few days that the reason that they'd let me in was because they were inspired to start their school by an Australian woman called Christine Caine, who's an alumni of Hillsong Church, the very famous but now very troubled Australian church that used to have Justin Bieber and others in its congregation. And so it was just with him finding that out about the movement, and then being able to do some follow-up stories on Christine Caine and others, that I realized just how big this movement was, and just talking to other journalist friends and editors and things, and just saying, hey, did you know that this thing's going on, that the 600 million people worldwide and the fastest growing religion in the world, and a lot of people just didn't really know what's going on. I think it certainly is a blind spot of a lot of media organizations, and myself included, that it's sort of secular liberals that tend to staff these newsrooms and perhaps don't really see these kind of phenomenons that are going on, which are really significant. So yeah, I just started reading some of the academic books on it. There are some absolutely brilliant academics who are studying this stuff around the world. But I just really want to write a popular journalistic account of the global phenomenon, get to travel to cool places and meet wonderful people and see some interesting things and some kind of awful things as well. Just try and tell a global story that I think has really gone under the radar.
How were you received, since a lot of these people are conservatives and they consider the media to be, the fake news, and you're one of them? What did it take to get them to open up and talk to you?
Oh, I mean, look, it all depends on the people. A lot of really big church leaders wouldn't speak to me, but they don't tend to really speak to any journalists, even friendly. But I was really interested more, I guess, in the stories of everyday people and probably some of the more political effects of what's going on. So yeah, it just depended. I mean, sometimes it's just a lot of knocking on doors and having people tell you to go away. And other times there were people that really welcomed me in. I mean, the gypsy guys in the UK I had so much fun with. And I think that sort of comes through in the chapter, and I still, go down and have dinner with them occasionally when I'm in London, because they're just, we're very different, from very different lives and have quite different political views and things like that. But they're just nice people who are, trying to do good stuff in the community. And it is nice to just get out there and see very different things to, the kind of big city, liberal newsroom kind of people that I probably hang out with a bit too much.
And what do other religions think of Pentecostalism? Let's just take Islam, Judaism, and then other denominations, Catholicism, Baptist, Presbyterian. Do they consider it a cult or just like a quirky, weird sect?
Look, it depends. They're really feeling the pinch in terms of conversions. Like I said, you convert existing people of faith, and obviously Christians are the easiest to convert, but they certainly will try other denominations. So I have a chapter in the book on an Islamic sect in Nigeria that is Pentecostalizing. Sometimes people call it born again Islam. Chrislam, it's got a few different names, and they were losing a lot of kids, especially to Pentecostal faith. In Lagos, Nigeria, it's this massive super city. You spend hours a day in traffic. People have grown up. A lot of people will have a Christian father and a Muslim mother. Those religious divides were just never so profound. And so, often, maybe to make grandma happy or whatever, you go to mosque on Friday and then church on Sunday. And they started noticing that these kids, when all these mega churches were really blooming from the late 80s in Nigeria, that these kids just sort of stopped going to mosque on Friday. The Pentecostals were just offering, all the music, the really powerful form of worship, the health and wealth that we talked about earlier. And they just weren't so interested in their Muslim heritage. So this particular sect is really, sort of Pentecostalizing. They don't like it when I say that. They get very upset because obviously it's a bit, this is a country that does have an Islamic insurgency in the north. So being seen as heretics, could put them at risk. And they just, generally push back very strongly. They just say that they're a modern movement and they do things a little bit differently. But it's certainly something happening there and across parts of sub-Saharan Africa, I think, where there has been traditionally a lot of mixing between Christian and Muslims, and people do have these mixed heritage. I think it's certainly something that we may see more and more of. In terms of the Catholics, I think they're the ones that are really feeling the pinch the most. So as I mentioned, in Latin America, it's basically accepted that the current Pope, that they had to give it to a Latin American because to try and sort of firm up the constituency there. In the 80s, John Paul II called Pentecostals ravenous wolves because they were stealing the flock. And so there's
Right.
certainly a huge, there's certainly a real sensitivity. And that's what there is now, a charismatic Catholic renewal movement, which is basically Pentecostal Catholicism. People can keep their saints and a bit of Vatican stuff and a bit of the traditional hierarchies. And these charismatic Catholics are included in this 600 million number. But I've certainly been to some of these churches in places like Guatemala, and they look and feel so much more Pentecostal. They're sort of Pentecostal in anything but name. It's sort of, white label method of sort of franchise or something that's happening there. So they're certainly very sensitive. And then I suppose other Christian denominations in the United States, particularly, I suppose, other evangelicals are really feeling the pinch too. Southern Baptists and all sorts of other congregations, they probably started playing Hillsong music when Hillsong was at its peak, and it was just so famous for these really grand devotional tunes that sound like pop songs, and people just really liked them. But certainly a trend that we're seeing in the evangelical circles now is churches saying that they're non-denominational. And part of that's just branding. You don't want to exclude potential customers. So if you just
Right.
say, everyone's welcome and we'll do a bit of everything, you're going to have more people walking in the door. So a lot of these mega churches, particularly led by the Pentecostals, are calling themselves non-denominational now, but there are certainly signs you can kind of look out for to see that they're Pentecostal. And then finally, Judaism. That is, really very interesting. I do finish my book in Israel. There is a really almost an obsession in the Pentecostal world with Israel. Often the Star of David flag is used to show that you're a Pentecostal church. I've seen that, in parts of rural Oklahoma. I've seen it in parts of Sao Paulo in Brazil. Seen it in Guatemala, that suddenly when you reach a church district, that people start putting up Stars of David flags to show that they're that they're Pentecostal. And there is a real focus, as we saw in the Trump administration, that was coming from his advisors like Paula White-Cain, who's a very well-known Pentecostal, that they really want the temple to be rebuilt, and they really they wanted the embassy to be moved to Jerusalem. I think there was one of those great Trump expressions where at one point he was speaking to a Jewish audience and he said, "Oh, you guys didn't care that I moved the embassy. I did it for the Christians." And that's kind of, that's probably quite accurate.
That's really funny. Yeah. Yeah. So if they're poaching other religious congregations, then that's going to feel the pinch a little bit. The rise of the nuns, the fastest growing religious cohort is the no religious affiliation. And those of us that have been tracking this for a long time have wondered, well, where are they going to go? Because they're probably not going to join the Skeptic Society and become devotees of Richard Dawkins, something like that. Maybe they're going to go to Deepak Chopra and kind of a Western Buddhism, or I didn't, but now I'm thinking, now that I read your book, it's like, oh, that's where they're going. Maybe they're going there, or maybe not so much that, or something along those lines, maybe Pentecostalism light for the experience, something like that. I'll tell you a couple stories. So let's see. And I don't know if you've ever been to a black church in the South, but it reminds me a little bit of Pentecostalism. I mean, 1996, I think it was, my best friend, Michael Coles, was running against Newt Gingrich for Congress in the district where Newt is in outside of Atlanta. Anyway, so the election was on Tuesday, so I went in for the weekend. And on Sunday, we went to Martin Luther King Jr.'s church in Atlanta, and I'd never been there, and I'd never been to a black church, and oh my God, it was something else. I mean, I've been to a lot of Presbyterian churches and so on, but which are just boring compared to this. I mean, it was a show. We're up, we're down, we're up, we're down, we're in the aisles, we're holding hands, we're singing, we're jumping up and down, we're dancing, and it's sort of an interaction with the minister. He's like, you might want to say amen, brother. There's kind of back and forth with the audience. And that was slightly different, though, than in the 80s. I went to a Pentecostal church in Pasadena. You're probably familiar with it. I don't remember the name of it, but it was a Korean Pentecostal church. Yeah. And I was by then an atheist, but I was curious on the kind of social psychology of how this stuff works. So they did the, come up to be healed, and everybody's standing there to be healed. So I went up just to see what would happen, right? And I could see the guy coming down the line, and they had like two people behind the person. So when the person falls over, filled with the spirit or whatever it is that's going on there, they didn't smack their head on the concrete floor, but I could tell that the minister kind of just gave him a little touch on the forehead, like Jesus, whatever it was, and Satan, get out of there, whatever the line was. And then they would just sort of fall over. And I thought, are they voluntarily doing this? Are they doing it out of kind of an anticipation of what role playing? This is what I'm supposed to do. They seem to really believe it. I mean, there were people writhing on the floor and almost orgasmic expressions. It's like, holy moly. So they got to me, and I just stood there, and they kind of pushed me a little bit, and they pushed me a little harder. Then the guys from behind kind of like pulled me down, like, don't spoil the show. Right. So this experience was different than the one in Georgia, although both were very, I don't know what you'd call it, expressive or interactive, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's the thing, that it really does look and feel like the local culture. So there are a lot of black Pentecostal churches. So the man who is considered the father of Pentecostalism, William J. Seymour, was the son of freed slaves from Louisiana. He was the first generation to get out and got out of the South because there were all sorts of lynchings and recriminations after that period of time. And it was in Los Angeles in 1906 that he founded it. And the church originally was very black. It was very expressive. It looked a lot more like working class African American kind of Christianity, and it's always had that very ecstatic, raucous feel to it. It's not the sort of buttoned up Irish Catholicism that I grew up with.
Right.
And the church for a long time, it was only sort of because it really went back down south, and because of Jim Crow that the Pentecostal original denominations had to split along white and black lines. But it's always had that real element of ecstatic Southern style worship, I suppose you'd call it. I also have a chapter in the book on it because rock and roll is basically secular Pentecostalism. Anyone big, basically from the 1950s in American music, came out of the Pentecostal churches. So starting with Sister Rosetta Tharpe, through obviously Elvis, but even Tammy Wynette, Marvin Gaye, almost anyone across such a broad spectrum of American music was coming out of these Pentecostal churches. And often, like Elvis, maybe they were, a kid just with an ear for music, and they were going to the boring church, so they were sneaking, down to see the Pentecostals do what they did best. So that musical element has always been so significant as well, and the physical worship, it's not just sitting there and being lectured to. I always think about in The Simpsons, Reverend Lovejoy, kind of boring everyone into submission. That's why I'm always like, no, that's what Pentecostals are really good at, knowing that people don't like being talked at. You're sitting in front of a computer all day, or, your boss is yelling at you at the factory or whatever. Why not go participate? Participating in this stuff is really important to people, and it makes it so much more real in their lives. So then you get to the California style churches that you're talking about, and the Korean churches, which are really big in California and also in the Koreas as well. And the second wave of Pentecostalism came out of 1960s hippie America. All these people who went to the Summer of Love and then realized that it was pretty hollow, and that they weren't having such a good time there themselves, came back down the Californian coast and especially in Orange County, and formed this second wave. The Jesus People movement, with the big hair and the music and all that was this really Californian thing, and people were bringing a lot of this kind of hippie culture and this really changing nature of America. That then a lot of consumerism came in with it as well. But that stuff is really important, and people do. There's some interesting science. Trying to work out when people are speaking in tongues. Are they? There was a viral video a few years ago of a church leader who sort of picked up his phone. He was saying blah blah blah, sort of speaking in tongues while he was scrolling. But there, there's obviously that element, and it's pretty obvious to spot when someone's doing it. But for a lot of people, they enter into a trance-like state, and they really believe that they're in tongues, or they're slain in the spirit, which is what you saw when people are falling back and feeling this full electricity through themselves. And there's some interesting stuff, if it happens and then they enter the trance, or if they sort of get themselves into a trance and then, more accepting. And to be honest, they're not exactly sure, but certainly there are some pretty profound things going on in terms of neuroscience, I suppose, when people do get into this moment, and for a certain, for a certain, population within the Pentecostal movement, this is really significant stuff and very central to their belief.
Have you seen the new Elvis biopic?
I have not. I've been meaning to watch it, but yeah, do they
show that they have quite a bit showing him as a young boy, where he's visiting some of these Pentecostal churches, and how influential that was on him, because he could see the effects on the audience. So he starts a few of his early performances where the previous acts before him are pretty boring, and the audience is just sitting there with their hands clasped, doing nothing. And then so all of a sudden he, at least the way they showed it in the film, he starts moving his legs and then his hips, where he became Elvis the Pelvis and all that stuff, and his arms, and he's flailing around, and he's on the floor spinning around, and he's back up, and all of a sudden the audience is just like goes crazy, right? And then his manager, Colonel Tom Parker, who was apparently something of a con man, but in any case, he saw, oh my God, this is something completely different. And then they showed the acts after him watching this going, oh my God, we are doomed. How do we follow this? Right? Because you can see the audience going crazy. So yeah, that's an interesting, background in terms of the kind of history of rock and roll. But what is your sense? I'm just curious what you think about this, since you've seen so much of it, of what's going on in somebody's mind. They do believe it, right? And then is there like a role modeling? They've seen other people writhing on the floor, speaking in tongues, or, kind of being animated. and doing kind of the direction of the minister or the other people around them? What is your sense of the psychology of that?
Yeah, look, it depends. And I must say these practices are getting less and less common, particularly in Western churches. Speaking in tongues and things like that is kind of on the way out.
Oh,
But certainly some, into the snake handling churches in the Appalachians, and they get really into all that stuff. And certainly some churches in different countries get into it. So it really depends. A lot of it is I think the musical heightening. Like I mentioned, just music is so integral to Pentecostalism, and you'll see. I mean, the music that I heard at this church that I wrote about in rural Alabama in the Appalachians that do the snake handling is absolutely stunning, and everyone in the congregation is so talented. You can tell they just grow up, and they sort of just move seamlessly between instruments because someone will have a moment and just kind of wander off and be filled with the Holy Spirit, and so some girl will just pick up the guitar and keep playing. It's often very very sort of circular, so you sort of get into a trance, and it's sometimes these songs will go for an hour, but they're also really evocative, and so you kind of key changes. It often feels like cinematic movie trailers. You're watching for what looks like a completely stupid movie, but you'll kind of get tingles just feeling this heightened, that there's some sort of sense of drama coming, and that's what a lot of this music does. It really lifts up people and makes them feel as though there's something there. So I think it's really just the building, and it's also just experience in these churches. Perhaps if you have a favorable moment where you do feel completely filled with the Holy Spirit, and this is sort of supposed to be a prerequisite of becoming a Pentecostal, that you will have that born again moment of dunking in the pool, but then you'll also have that second moment of being filled with the Holy Spirit. So it should already be I think, meaningful. So I suppose people are looking out for it and trying to get themselves into that state. But I have asked quite a few people, and it's just different for everyone. And often it's something that they might feel is imperceptible, or perhaps they just don't want to, I don't know, tell me how they kind of psych themselves into it, or they just seem to believe that it comes onto them because they do ultimately feel it is, God in the person of the Holy Spirit that is filling them. So it's not an easy thing to necessarily describe or pin down.
Yeah, I was taken to that Korean Pentecostal church in Pasadena by one of my roommates at Pepperdine. I went to Pepperdine University as a Church of Christ school from Texas, and at the time I was born again. And it was the early 70s when this happened. So it was kind of the non-denominational Jesus movement. I don't even know if you'd call it early evangelical or whatever it was, but the point was to be non-denominational. We don't belong to any church. It's just me and Jesus. I'm just going to read the Bible. Then we're going to have these Bible study classes, but with the guy with the guitar and the Bee Gees hair and the gold chains and all that stuff. Right. And, yeah, but my friend, so there's several of us were kind of into this, and then Pepperdine was a religious school. All right, and it's in Malibu. That didn't hurt, right? Anyway, but I never got into it quite like he did. He really felt the Spirit, like the Trinity, right? The Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. The Holy Ghost part. I think they're probably Protestants, Catholics, Baptists are less. I think they acknowledge it, but they don't place that much emphasis on it. Whereas the Pentecostals believe that the Holy Ghost is actively involved in the world and in people's lives.
Yeah, that's really the key defining aspect of it. And like I said, so it can be hard to sometimes spot Pentecostals now. They're under all sorts of different names and often that non-denominational branch. But that's usually how you can tell the Pentecostal influence on a church is the role of the Holy Spirit. And whether it's in their faith statement, how they practice, how they talk, music as well, but certainly that's the real difference and what really sets them apart. And there's all sorts of academic arguments about whether Pentecostals are even evangelical. I say that I sort of broadly think that they are a branch of evangelicism, and just their influence on the evangelical movement is so profound at the moment that I think it's easier to see them within that. But yeah, it's all about that Holy Spirit, and that's why it is very individual religion. It really speaks to our times. Like I mentioned, the people that maybe aren't so keen on big institutional churches like the Catholic Church after all of the sexual abuse that's gone on, or maybe do have that kind of maybe we're a bit into astrology, maybe have a few other things that they're kind of into, and Pentecostalism just has that ability to be a lot of different things to a lot of different people because of that role of the Holy Ghost and the individual experience with it.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I got from reading your book, I never understood Jews for Jesus. It's like if you accept Jesus as your savior, you're not a Jew by definition, right? You're a Christian.
Yeah, well, that was the other the other movement that I didn't quite mention earlier, but there certainly are, particularly in Israel, and a lot of Orthodox priests in that who are pretty unhappy with the Jews for Jesus movement. And there's been, recently there's been quite a few rabbis and other people of religious influence in Israel who have been found to be undercover Pentecostal or from the Jews for Jesus movement missionaries. And there is, again, some of the definitions are a bit broad, but a lot of that, the Jews for Jesus do come out of the Pentecostal movement. And yeah, there certainly does seem to be a lot of discussions within Jewish communities at the moment about, what to do about these kind of people, because there does seem to be conversion as the aim, a lot more than perhaps they might say outwardly.
Another cut that I have seen made in the last few decades is along the lines of to what extent it's your job as a Christian to take care of the poor, help the needy, don't be so political, but more personal. I forget what that's called. It's sort of the opposite of prosperity gospel, because then you have that other side, like God wants you to be. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Say it again.
Liberation theology.
Liberation theology, yes, right. And then you got the other group of, we got to be political, we got to overturn Roe v. Wade, we got to support these politicians, and so on. And so I gather Pentecostals lean more toward doing both, right? I mean, we want to be active in the world as well as the next life.
Yeah, and I mean, look, broadly, just saying that, the kind of political leanings of 600 million people all around the world is very difficult. And yet there is certainly a portion of my book devoted to the Pentecostal influence in sort of the new radical right. So with Trump and Bolsonaro and all those kind of guys, there certainly is a very strong Pentecostal base behind them. But yeah, look, undoubtedly, there is also a movement within a lot of these churches that is very communitarian. That is, again, as I've said, this is the faith of the working poor. And these are often, people banding together to almost form parasite institutions where states are failing. And it's a very, very handy thing for certain political leaders, if, to say, don't rely on the state, go out and join a church. And that certainly has been a bit of a part of it. But these are people who very much, understand the needs of their own communities. They're very much within these communities. That's such a huge part of Pentecostalism that it's, you go into Brazilian favelas and there are just Pentecostal churches all the way up the hills, and that just have so much more resonance with people and what they need in the here and now as well as the ever after. So certainly this kind of communitarian mindedness is certainly a part of the movement. But as Andrew Chestnut, he's a friend of mine. He's a religious professor at Virginia State, I think, who was the first, sort of Westerner to really go into Brazil and study this phenomenon. He said, with all those great liberation theology pastors of the 70s who were, doing incredible work standing up to, really horrendous dictatorships and stuff like that. He said that, they chose this Catholicism that embraced the poor. It's just that the poor chose Pentecostalism.
Right. So sometimes I push evangelicals on this, when did Jesus become a capitalist and a military guy and so on? And part of their response is it's not the government's job to take care of the poor. This is why they're against welfare programs and big government programs, wealth transfer programs, and so on. That's the job of private organizations like churches. And so where do Pentecostals come down on kind of the politicization of taking care of the poor, whether it's the state's job or it's church's job or both?
Yeah, look, it really all depends on where you are. Like I said, the leanings tend to be more conservative. I mean, certainly on social issues, but economically maybe not so much. I mean, the thing with Pentecostals, right, there's no pope, there's no Archbishop of Canterbury, there's, anyone with a following is, can be a preacher or a prophet or an apostle. And so there isn't any, real dictum coming on high for all of these things. But by and large, they would say that, getting, people giving their tithes and then doing community work is a good thing, and that they should be doing more of it. Some people might want a bit more economic aid from the state. I mean, who wouldn't if you're, living from, if you're living hand to mouth in a favela or in a slum in Lagos or something like that. But yeah, I think there certainly is a bit of a sense that, got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps a bit, get into church, and, be part of this community, and we look after each other and we go out and do things for the poor. And I mean, I must say, I've been to some pretty, I went to a church that was just cinder blocks and some tarpaulin in rural Mozambique. And, because the church had literally been blown away a few weeks earlier. And those people didn't have a lot, they still gave a bit to their pastor, and he kind of had nice suits and stuff, but he was a good guy. And, straight afterwards, we went to the local rubbish tip with loaves of bread and gave them out to the people who live in slums on top of the rubbish tip. So there certainly is that sense of, particularly in the developing world, that the church needs to do something, and that people should, give, after church, have that ecstatic outpouring and then give a little bit of charity afterwards. As for particular views of roles of the state, I mean, Mozambique's basically been a failed state since 1990. So I'm sure people would happily, take a welfare payment, but it's not really happening there. So yeah, the boring answer is it's really hard, but certainly in the United States, white Pentecostal churches would lean against government intervention. Latina churches, I mean, it's really hard to say, but certainly Pentecostals Latina Pentecostals voted for Trump at almost twice the rate that they did for Biden. So there very much is a right-wing leaning. And then, I mean, black churches tend to be more democratic, but that's probably, more historical than anything.
Yeah, I'd never thought about the connection between Pentecostalism and Trump and Bolsonaro and other kind of populist authoritarians. I guess the question is, do they really believe, are they really being influenced? Are they just, I don't know, kowtowing to the base and we'll just talk to anybody that'll get me votes? Sort of like when Trump was asked about QAnon, he said, I don't know much about them, but they like me, so I like them. Right? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't think anyone's quite so naked as he is about this stuff. But I mean, look, I think part of it is it's the style. So it is that, they're getting up in front of rallies and they're feeling very energized by having an informal style. And, if ever you hear, or if you try to read a transcript of Trump talking at those things, it's just nonsensical. It's just word association, but that is in many ways the Pentecostal style, right? It's what you feel in the moment. It's jumping around. Pardon me, sorry, I'm recovering from superbug. And it's that very off the cuff. It's from the gut, it's not taking, these aren't, they're not some, Ted Cruz kind of loser who was a debate star in Harvard or whatever and is going to go on about Hayekian economics or something. These are guys who are just like, you find it hard. Like, look at those guys. They're, it's their fault. Look over there kind of thing. And that's, it's very much that style that finds common cause. And, I mean, the first and most enthusiastic backers of Trump were Pentecostals. It was people like Paula White-Cain who just got it. They just saw something, I think, in each other. And, people like Paula White-Cain, she was, I think she was a sort of rural Mississippi, pretty poor white family. And, a lot of Southern Baptist style people just would have been looking down on, on people like her. And they, kind of having their time in the sun. So they're finding common cause. And that's certainly, with Bolsonaro as well. One of the leaders of the insurrection just yesterday in Brasilia was a Pentecostal preacher.
Really?
And he certainly had a lot of that movement that got behind him, even though, most of the, Brazilian Pentecostals are the working poor, they are people of color, all those sorts of things. But they just, they just tend to see something in someone like Bolsonaro and social conservative issues that, these guys can just hammer on all the time and kind of misinformation and distrust. There certainly is a lot of that going on within Pentecostal communities.
Yeah, I'd never thought about Trump as a Pentecostal preacher, but now that you mention it, because he is a good speaker, he's very effective. And you're right. If you actually read the text of what he said, it's just sounds like word salad. But in
Yeah,
fact,
and he knows. Oh, sorry. Yeah, he knows how to maintain an audience, and that's again this because Pentecostal. They often don't have any theological training. They're just the most charismatic guy in the village, or the most charismatic guy that grew up in your small little church in somewhere in rural Texas, and so they tend to have a real sense for people. They tend to have a sense when an audience is waning. They feed off energy. Those sorts of things are incredibly, incredibly important to Pentecostalism. And you can certainly see it with, someone like Trump, at a rally, he just senses where people are going and what they want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And the other thing I liked about your book, particularly with the sunglass Jesus, because it is a modern movement. I mean, it's barely a century old, as you mentioned. It's young enough, like Mormonism, Scientology, you can track the entire history, which you do, all the way back. I love that Amy Semple McPherson, maybe the first woman to have her own radio station and show and so forth. That's pretty new, right? I mean, radio, right? So this is a modern religion. So it's not lost in the mists of time, Moses or Muhammad or Jesus, who knows? It's so long ago. Here you can track them.
Yeah, and I mean that's part of the fun. There are the original newspaper articles from the Los Angeles papers from when that first moment happened, fell on William Seymour's congregation in 1906, and I mean quite a big part of it. I think historically was that the day that news of what happened in his congregation hit the headlines was the same day of the San Francisco earthquake. And this was a time when a lot of Christians were pre-millennials, so they honestly thought that God was coming back, and something like an earthquake was the earthquake happened, and then you look up and he's there. So things like that were really important. And I mean, you can actually read the original newspaper accounts and of what happened, and mass media really played a role in popularizing what happened. In the old days, it might have just been that little church caught fire a bit and some other people started imitating their style. But this news of this was spreading around the world thanks to, early mass media. And so people were coming to go see it for themselves. And then they might have been, had the spirit fall on them in the ecstasy of the moment. And, it's real, real yellow journalism as well. And, calling them chattering monkeys. And, they described, one person described it, what happened as the last vomit of Satan, and all this kind of stuff, but it drew people in the door. And then, someone like Semple McPherson, who was, probably one of the real original, she's a proto-televangelist, really. And she was, just said to have this uncanny sense for a wavering audience. And it certainly was these accounts that were able to follow and just see these really fascinating figures who were, very flawed people in their own way, and sort of see it, see the historical accounts and almost feel like you saw it play out in real time. So it was quite fortunate to be able to go and read all of that, and quite enjoyable.
Totally interesting stuff. Have you seen? I don't know if you've seen the movie Leap of Faith. Steve Martin plays a faith healer. He's sort of a Pentecostal or evangelical. I'm not sure you classify him as, but it's a brilliant movie. Deborah Winger plays his sort of sidekick who reads the prayer cards into his earpiece so he can divine the names of people and their ailments and so on in the audience. All this was taken from James Randi's book, The Faith Healers, about Peter Popoff and some of these other preachers, televangelists, who are really conning people with tricks. Although you don't need too many of these tricks, like the prayer cards where you get the information and you pretend like God has given it to you. Or like a little old lady walks into the tent and she's kind of frail. So they said, "Would you like a wheelchair, ma'am? You could sit in the front row." So they wheel her to the front row. And then, an hour later, the preacher's coming around. "I just want you to get out of that chair right now. Jesus wants you to walk." And then the little old lady stands up and walks. And everybody thinks she's been healed. Of course, she could already walk. Now, at that moment, she doesn't say, "Hey, hang on. I haven't been healed. I could already walk," right? Because it's a show, right? So no one, even if you're skeptical, you're not going to, sort of spoil the show. But the kind of the take home of the movie in part was, that it's a bit of a con game going on here. But really, you don't need too many of those tricks, because most of it is the audience kind of pushing the whole show along. There was a moment in the film where the Liam Neeson character who plays the local sheriff, who is not enamored with these poor farmers giving him all their money. And so he walks in and says, "I want to testify, preacher." And then he launches into this whole thing. Let me tell you who you're giving this, who this guy is you're giving your money to. He was a con man. He was a thief. He was a drug addict. He was an alcoholic, and so on. And then so Deborah Winger and Steve Martin kind of look at each other like, is this the moment? Yeah, this is the moment. And he gets up there and he just says, yes, absolutely. I am all of those things and worse. And who do you want to hear it from? Somebody who has no idea what it's like to be a sinner. I've been down further than anyone's been down, and now I'm up. And then all of a sudden, 10 minutes later, the audience is just going crazy, right? Such a great turnaround.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I mean, I think certainly we're seeing a much more sanitized Pentecostalism in the West, but in places like South Africa, they've just sort of had a series of these dramas. There was a couple of years ago, it went viral that this preacher claimed to raise a man from the dead. You can still see the clip on YouTube. It's a preacher called Alf Lukau, and he sort of had this guy in the coffin, and it's very comical. Because this guy kind of just sits up and looks around sort of like a meerkat, and they're saying, he's being brought back from the dead and praise Jesus, but he was sort of really slated internationally. But I went and saw his show in Paris when I was sort of trying to get him to speak to me a couple of years ago, and there was a bit of that kind of wheelchair stuff, but a lot of that is the theatre that people like. I mean, if you people, like I said, no one wants Reverend Lovejoy speaking at them. You might as well have a bit of fun. Right. And if you believe this, and I do believe that the overwhelming majority of Pentecostals, really do believe in this. You have to, by definition, in miracles and things like that. Well, maybe, obviously this is a bit of a fake thing, but it's the belief in the theatre, and it's speaking to one thing that everyone does believe, and it's a bit transgressive, and it's a bit one of the really interesting things I think about Trump is that people have always said, why do all the Christians like him? He's, divorced, he's uncouth, he's, and they probably don't want to sit down. Some of them probably would want to sit down to dinner with him, but, he's not really their kind of guy, but that's part of the point, that he's not constrained by their morality. He'll do the job for them. That's why they called him King Cyrus, It was just as long as he's going to get the job done. And, the people, these beliefs are genuinely felt, that we are moving towards the end time. We are in the days of God's advancing kingdom. So, by any means necessary. And if that means getting some extra people in, saving souls by these kind of stunts, or whether it's just kind of affirming beliefs and affirming that it is a bit of you against the world. And all you hear about is science and feminism and technology and what about belief? There is certainly a sense that there is a secular liberal world closing in on people. They say you can't turn on the TV without seeing people kneeling, and you can't watch the Academy Awards without Robert De Niro telling you his politics and that kind of thing. And they do really feel besieged by the world around them. Yes. And so maybe it's I think that transgression element is certainly something that people do seem to like and perhaps not take as seriously as we all might think.
Yeah, there's another scene in the Leap of Faith where the Liam Neeson character kind of confronts him privately. How can you do this? And the Steve Martin character says, look, if people go to New York and take in a Broadway show, or they go to Vegas and take in a casino act, they're going to spend a couple $100. It's a show. And here they donate $20 and they get an equally good show.
Yeah. And that's, people that buy tickets deserve to see a show. And that was something that the 60s Californian Pentecostals that I mentioned, that they did really, really well. A man called John Wimber, he was sort of he was a founder of the band that went on to become the Righteous Brothers, and he was their early manager. Right. And he was a music man. He got, that people didn't want this cookie cutter experience. They didn't want this McDonald's where everything looks exactly the same. It is meant to be exciting and invigorating and transcendent, make people feel something different. Work sucks. A lot of people's, right. Lives are pretty hard. Why not go and feel excited and different and just something else, something that connects you with some greater meaning on a Sunday rather than just walking around a Walmart.
Yeah. I told you by email that story when I debated Dinesh D'Souza at this, I think it was a evangelical church in Wisconsin. In any case, it was on politics and morality and religion and science and all that. But this was in 2018, so it was in the middle of the whole Trump thing, and I just really wanted to know, how can you guys support Trump? I mean, you're Christians. You believe in values and morals and honesty and truth-telling and fidelity and so on. He was thrice married, cheated on all his wives, had sex with a Playboy bunny and paid her off. And this, not to mention the bankruptcies and the screwing his contractors and just on and on and on. And basically Dinish's answer, and then echoed by people in the Q&A, God works in mysterious ways. Look at the characters in the Bible. They're deeply flawed people to kind of deliver God's message. And, who are we to say, yeah, of course we're not crazy about his moral character, but we're not hiring a moral leader. We're hiring a politician to get us the judges we want to overturn Roe v. Wade and so on. And he did.
Yeah, that was why it was. Yeah, they called him from the start King Cyrus. He's our King Cyrus. The Persian king who freed the Jewish people, or the Israeli people. And yeah, that was always the thing. It was just that this is where Pentecostals will say that we're in the days of God's advancing kingdom, and we just got to get shit done, and whoever it takes.
Is there anything in Pentecostal like Martin Luther and the 95 Theses, and here's the problems with Catholicism, so we need to start a new religion, and it's a kind of a theological based, or is there just nothing like that? It's purely a bottom-up movement.
There probably, there is one figure called C. Peter Wagner who died a few years ago. He's really quite an interesting figure who's brought through a couple of really important doctrines. And he was originally a disciple of John Wimber, who I mentioned earlier, the Righteous Brothers guy.
Oh, yeah.
And then they, sort of took on a lot of his ideas. But also he was a missionary in Latin America, I believe in Bolivia and Argentina, I think, for many years. So he took on a lot of the practices in the developing world and brought them back and kind of made them made them more into doctrines. But yeah, he's done some interesting things. So he started quite a contentious thing that's called the New Apostolic Reformation. And then he denied it exists, and then he went back and said, no, it's there. And a lot of people who we would say are members of it deny that it exists, and there's all sorts of academic wrangling at the moment going on about defining it and just general stuff that's well above my pay grade. But there certainly was a movement within that New Apostolic Reformation and within Wagner's acolytes to have Pentecostalism or neo-charismatic Pentecostalism split off and called its own denomination. So, you kind of go Orthodox, Catholic, etc. So really have it as its own thing. But to be honest, that kind of stuff I just don't know how important it really is, to the average Pentecostal. There are certainly some practices like bringing back the fivefold ministry. So you have your apostles, prophets, teachers and whatnot, and the offices of the apostle and the prophet are really important in Pentecostalism, and they're bringing them back. So the apostles sort of plant churches and have these governance networks where they kind of keep an eye out for each other because there's no overarching body, and you get some people, raising guys from the dead and doing some sort of stuff that can be a bit embarrassing. And then the prophets who, there were so many prophets, especially in the United States, that we've seen in politics, who have been saying, I prophesied Trump and all this kind of stuff. So you've got a lot of that going on within the movement, certainly. And I'd say that, if there was a figure who's been quite transformative in terms of doctrine and the way things are done, it was certainly C. Peter Wagner. And he was out in Colorado Springs, which is just, Ted Hagee, the minister who had some indiscretions with drugs and gay prostitutes, I think it was, and who made his comeback recently, and then, seems to still be dogged by some of these issues, shall we say. So he was Wagner was a really influential figure in Colorado Springs, and Colorado Springs is just a really kind of fascinating hotbed of this particularly white Pentecostalism in the United States.
I'm going to show you another book I read when I was in college. You'll recognize this. The Late Great Planet Earth with Hal Lindsey.
That's a great cover. That's one of those
gorgeous
kind of 1970s. Yeah.
1970s, yeah. But this was the best-selling book of all of the 1970s, so I'm told. and prophesizing the end times and so on. We read that very carefully, and then it had the Los Angeles Times headlines, this happens in the Middle East, and Kissinger did this, and the Ayatollah did that. Oh, it's all there in chapter 3, and this is prophesied in the book of Daniel, and then I gave a copy to one of my philosophy professor, and he wrote me 2 pages of notes about what was wrong with all this stuff. I went, oh yeah, interesting. Is that whole end times? Because the Left Behind series sold even more copies than Late Great Planner. Is that a kind of a spin-off of Pentecostalism?
Yeah, Left Behind. I don't think they were actually Pentecostals, but
I think they were evangelicals. But there's so much overlap.
Yeah, so yeah, it's as I say, I think that Pentecostalism is a branch of evangelicism. It's sort of born again plus, because you've got to go through that second Holy Spirit step. It is quite interesting because there has been some sort of general changes about end times theology that's been happening over the last few decades. It has been fairly universal across evangelical churches, but then again, just person to person. What I think they really did was really simplify it, a lot of the stuff. So, there was Pentecostals were generally dispensational premillennialists. So yeah, they just thought, God's back suddenly.
What is that? Hang on. Give us what those terms mean. Dispensational.
Okay, so yeah, it just means that suddenly, earthquake and God straight back. So you've got to, live a pious and good life, because you never know when he's coming back. There really has been quite a pronounced shift among evangelicals, probably since the 70s or 80s, to say, to what's kind of known as post-millennialism. So it's you got to build up the conditions and do all the right stuff, and the temple and the mount and all that kind of stuff, and then Jesus comes back. What this sort of is now is as well saying, we don't need to have all these arguments. There's a movement now called victorious eschatology. And it's kind of just combining the vibes, basically, of the last few decades, and just saying, look, no, what's the point in arguing? We all more or less believe the same thing. We say that we're in the days of God's advancing kingdom. So we need to be working towards it, but let's not have these, sort of grand arguments about exactly what's going on and when, apart from the fact that everyone knows that, it's if you're in the business of prophecy, you don't giving dates and times gets you out of the business of prophecy pretty quickly. So, it's more, let's work towards a common goal, get people in the tent and say that, we are in the days of God's advancing kingdom. A lot of Pentecostals now will say that we've already been through the trials and tribulations. So the Holocaust is often quite strongly pointed to as saying, that was one of the, the things on the path to the end times. So we do have to be prepared. It could kind of happen any moment, but we also need to build things up and get all the conditions right.
The clock seems to have started in 1948 with the founding of the State of Israel, right?
Yeah. It's so interesting. The kind of philo-Semitism within a lot of the movement. There was a really big Brazilian drug dealer. There's a phenomenon of evangelical drug dealers in Brazil. They're basically just local militia leaders who are, very Pentecostal, who attack, some of the traditional African faiths that are in the area. Very big kind of Bolsonaro guys. But there was this one quite big drug dealer called I think Pescial, which is I think it's big fish, it means. And they finally found his hideout, and it was full of Torah scrolls. He had a fresco of the ancient city of Jerusalem, it around his swimming pool. He had all this kind of stuff. And so there is this quite, at times I found it a bit creepy, this kind of philo-Semitism, this sort of, I did speak to some American evangelicals on these Israel tours that are, huge, big business over there. And there were a couple of people talking to me, and some of the things they were saying, about how every Jew is a miracle, and therefore there's miracles happening all over the state of Israel. It just, that sort of superhumanization of, it's not dehumanizing Jewish people anymore, but superhumanizing people is a little bit creepy. And I was sort of thinking, my gosh, 40 years ago, you probably would have been an anti-Semite. It just really has kind of flipped on that, the coins just kind of flipped to the other side. Because ultimately, and, people in Jews for Jesus and evangelicals get really upset with me. I get a lot of mail when I say this, but I mean, it's true. They really believe, I think, that there's common political and faith-based cause that's found between Judaism and Christianity. You hear all the time now Republicans particularly talking about, Judeo-Christian heritage and these kind of invented ideas. And so they're certainly seen as, and particularly since 9/11 and things like that, Israel is, seen as, as a, example state of how to deal with Islamic insurgencies or, just Islamic neighbors or Palestinian people. And so it's, there certainly is a sense, I think, that they have common cause. But I mean, at the end of the day, the end times, theology is still pretty clear. That they're going to convert or they're going to burn in hell. It's just, I think everyone's more interested in, talking about the here and now and sort of immediate political considerations. And as far as I'm aware, Trump was pretty popular among a lot of, right-wing Israelis and some, certainly some more right-wing Jewish people in the United States as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just by chance, I had somebody emailing me this morning about Pascal's wager and why,
Yeah.
as an atheist, I really am making a big mistake because it's all going to happen and the afterlife is true and so on. So I just asked him, well, what's the right religion that I have to adhere to so I don't go to the bad place? And he said, well, Jesus and Christianity, that's the turning point. I said, so Jews are not going? He goes, well, okay, Jews get a special pass. Basically, everybody else is going to hell, but the Jews, well, come on.
Yeah, it's like a +1 card or something to get into the
Right.
show. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
It's too
It's kind
funny.
of it's just it's just a question that people don't want to answer. But I mean, you saw there was sort of a lot of theatrics going on around Trump's inauguration. And there was a rabbi who's sort of famous for doing some stunts and things like that, and probably being more of a political figure. His name escapes me at the moment, but wrapping people up in certain cloaks and rugs and doing all this kind of theatrics, and there were some people in Israel, I think, that were trying to do that stuff for Trump as well. So there's certainly it's not entirely one-sided. I think it's just just the very boring, old-fashioned immediate personal considerations that rather than any sort of grand theology for some of these guys, for sure.
I never understood the Jews killed Jesus trope that Christians have been hammering on for centuries. Martin Luther himself was a noted anti-Semite, and because Jesus was Jewish, there were no Christians, and in any case, if you believe that Jesus had to die for our sins, and that this was all ordained by God ahead of time, and you're an original sinner, and the only way out is to accept that Jesus died for your sin, then he had to die. You should be thanking the Jews or the Romans or whoever you think did it, right? Because it had to happen.
Yeah, look, I think that kind of trope is just, I mean, you might hear some transgressive kind of 4chan guys talking Jews killed Jesus now, trying to make a name for themselves. But you'd never hear that in Pentecostal or really Christian circles anymore. Yeah, I mean, apart from the fact, I think it's just so, it's just a straight up anti-Semitic trope that I don't think anyone other than some online idiots trying to be edgelords would say that kind of stuff. But yeah, you certainly won't hear that in Pentecostal churches.
All right, let's talk about your the 7 mountain mandate. I love that section in the book, bringing about the end of the world. And the 7 spheres are education, religion, family, business, government, arts and entertainment, and media. So this would be an example of kind of the church being actively involved in people's lives from the bottom to the top.
Yeah. It's quite a powerful movement, and directly inspired some people who took part in the January 6th Capitol riots in Washington 2 years ago. It was an idea that actually came up with Lauren Cunningham and a couple of other old Reagan guys. In the 70s, they all had concurrent visions of, God telling them about, the need to take over these 7 spheres, kind of laid dormant. And then a very entrepreneurial guy called Lance Wallnau, who is, quite involved in New Apostolic Reformation circles that I mentioned earlier. He's a businessman from Phoenix, and just like I think he's Texan and University of Phoenix. I think it's kind of a dodgy outfit from out of there, but Yeah, he really brought it to life in, I think it was 2013, with Bill Johnson from Bethel Redding. I'm not sure if you've heard of Bethel Redding, but it's quite a big mega church that has about 11% of the population of the town of Redding in Northern California, and kind of, I call it a company town because it kind of controls a lot of the town. So yeah, they wrote this book called Invading Babylon, the Seven Mountains Mandate. And it just really took off from there. And Walnell's a real... he's a Facebook guy. He kind of has a show on, a live stream on Facebook every day that is, it's hardly Christian anymore. It's really just like watching One American News Network, but from his living room.
That's a great analogy.
it's really just about politics and, the issue of the day. And it's sort of just just a bit of an old bloke around here on Facebook, but he's pretty popular. And this idea has been very popular, even in Australia where I am now and where I'm from, where evangelical stuff is, we just don't really have that many evangelicals apart from Hillsong, but you do see people starting to really take this on board, and it's really inspiring people, to go from the ground up. There are lines in this Invading Babylon book about the Seven Mountains Mandate that says there's no such thing as secular employment for the believer. And it's really just saying, sort of take matters into your own hand. And this is why it aligns really well with that radical right that we're seeing, really infect the Republican Party. It's, how many people you're seeing charging into school boards with their guns because, they heard some kid down the road was reading Harry Potter. Often a lot of these guys are, there's been quite a few in Colorado. And as I mentioned earlier, that Colorado Springs influence. So we're certainly seeing this. It's saying, just take matters into your own hands. We're in the days of God's advancing kingdom. You got to do whatever you can. And it just really aligns well with those kind of Republican, I think, sensibilities. Republicans do tend to be better focused on the local. Democrats all want to be Obama and deliver this, great speech about, purple states and all that kind of thing. Republicans are really good at organizing on local levels, and so are Pentecostals. And so you're sort of seeing that come together. But in large parts of America, this Pentecostal movement is really becoming heavily political, and in many ways they are indistinguishable. And so it is about just you got to reclaim everything for yourself. And so it can be quite violent. As I mentioned, we did see people directly inspired by Seven Mountains Mandate who were at the January 6th rally, and in some ways it can all look a bit pathetic, when it's just a few guys dressed up in the Viking helmet or whatever, but at the same time, someone charging into your local school board, because a kid has blue hair or was reading Harry Potter, armed to the teeth. It's pretty terrifying stuff.
Do you remember Ammon Bundy, the sovereign citizen, anti-government guy? Yeah. So March,
he was Mormon.
Yes, right. Yes, but I guess the common thread would be anti-government or don't let them do this to us kind of thing. Last March, he was reading the story that, what was it? It was one of these cases where a child welfare services showed up at somebody's house to check on the well-being of the infant, and the infant wasn't doing well. So they sent in the police and they took the infant to the hospital to give him some food, just basics to get him back to health. And so this Bundy guy got a hold of this story. He's like, oh my God, they're kidnapping children. They're stealing them from parents now. And so this story went on for weeks, and then he kind of rallied the troops. All right, Saturday, we're all going down to this hospital where they are kidnapping children. So it went from the one case to this is a global phenomenon of kidnapping and killing children and so on. And all of a sudden the hospital had to shut down. And there was, violence and threats of violence, I guess. And anyway, it's just completely out of hand. That's what kind of reminds me of that,
Yeah, I think sovereign citizens are really just another level. They're pretty off the reservation. I mean, the kind of people who are involved in, who are into the Seven Mountains kind of stuff, probably still have normal jobs and normal lives. They're very, unlike the Bundys who are, ranchers who just didn't want to pay the government their rent, basically.
Right.
And who, kind of, developed this, evolving political and spiritual kind of world around that. I mean, that's the thing is that, these people kind of with normal jobs and, like I said, there is a real focus on employment that, there is no such thing as secular employment for the believer. and education are the two really big ones that do really seem to animate people. So they are, often quite fairly normal people who will suddenly just, feel this huge moment of inspiration from your Seven Mountains stuff. But I think also very much from that, all the stuff that we know is really bad for us that we're addicted to with social media and all the, inflammatory stuff that it's doing to us. And I spend a lot of time watching Wall Now and all these guys preaching during the pandemic. And you could just see, and, following people in the comments and stuff on Facebook, and you could just see this world of people going down these rabbit holes. And at the time in the pandemic when you maybe didn't, you weren't going to your church on Sunday, so you weren't talking about some of the ideas with other people and them kind of being like, oh, that's a bit crazy, or, moderating you, or, seeing your kids or whatever that week and them sort of, pulling you back a bit. So I think people did really get sucked into this stuff. And it's certainly, we know so much about what social media is doing to our brains and what it's doing to pretty normal people, just sucking them into these worlds. And I think the pandemic really helped accelerate the Seven Mountains mandate, because you had these very politicized guys that are broadcasting about it constantly on social media. And it really is, it's not something you might see preached so much in churches. Some people certainly will, but it's sort of one of those just ideas that's in the ecosystem, and it's very, very online. And it's really becoming, it's only growing apace, I think, in Pentecostal circles, certainly, and definitely wider evangelical circles as well.
Yeah, you see some of that with the kind of thrill that Elon bought Twitter to kind of stick it to the libtards. We're going to just take it. We're taking back the media ourselves. Now I've seen some tweets about Elon needs to buy the entire academy, all universities, because they're all corrupt.
Yeah. Education seems to be the one that really sets people off. But there are absolutely people that were saying that gleefully about Elon, buying, just starting the media revolution to take control of the media again, and put all us fake news peddlers out of work. So yeah, I think it's just really one to watch out for. You're going to see it a lot more, and it's the number 7 is a really important number in the book of Revelation and throughout the Bible. It symbolizes completeness, and mountains obviously quite evocative. So the 7, it is kind of again hinting towards that God's advancing kingdom. We're working towards the end times. If we can just take over these 7 mountains, then it's a bit wink and nudge, but maybe the big guy's going to come back. So it's I think it's something that we're only going to see grow. And you're seeing idiots like Charlie Kirk, that Turning Point USA guy, who isn't. I think he goes to church, but he's not especially. He's just a political activist and sort of a media figure. He talks about 7 mountains, about taking over the 7 spheres.
Oh, he does. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Right.
So you're really seeing it start to go within the movement. So I really expect we're going to be hearing more and more about it in the lead up to, is it 2024 when we have to go around again? Yeah.
Yep. That's it. It's coming. Well, it has been a curious thing. I've been talking about this for quite a long time. First, much of what Trump did was pretty standard GOP stuff, right? Just lowering taxes and deregulating business and tightening up the border. Even the nomination of the 3 Supreme Court justices, it'd have probably been the same 3 or 3 indistinguishable ones from them had it been a President Cruz or President Marco Rubio. I'm not sure about Jeb Bush, but so that wasn't so shocking. But it's kind of where the GOP goes from here. Did they go back to a traditional kind of regular kind of George Will, Charles Krauthammer type, John McCain, Mitt Romney conservative, or do they continue down the trend toward that populism? Oh, I was going to tell you another Dinesh story. We've debated many times. So maybe 15 years ago, after a debate in the green room, what are you working on now? Oh, I'm getting out of the book writing business. I'm getting into making films. Making films. That's right, yeah. And I said, why? He goes, because Hollywood controls the media, the film industry. So I'm going to start with documentaries and I'm going to get into dramas, and this is what we have to do to fight back. That's like one of these 7 mountain things.
Yeah. It's a, just general, that slightly conspiratorial world's against you kind of thinking. But yeah, I think you're seeing it more kind of a bit more codified. Maybe people start to go, oh, that makes sense. I have always thought that, I can't, can't watch a movie without being given, all these liberal ideas or something coming through it. So yeah, it's just, I think it's just cohering a lot of people's, intuitions or ideas that they kind of had out there. And it's like, just fits very nicely into, okay, yeah, there is this kind of, things are controlled by other people, and all we have to do is just, take them back. Like it's like politics is that easy.
So you mentioned most of these people are just kind of regular people with jobs. I've been thinking about this. Who was it that showed up on January 6th? Most of them were just regular people. These were not extremist kooks. I mean, the Proud Boys were there. There was some of those people, but most of the people had jobs and families, and
there were a lot of very wealthy people who flew in on private planes, who owned real estate empires, and they're more than ordinary,
yeah, right. So what are they doing there, and why did they accept Trump's claim that the election was rigged and not, say, Bill Barr's head of the Department of Justice looked into it, couldn't find anything? Why don't they accept him? And let me just kind of riff for a second on a broader spectrum here. In my conspiracy book, I talk about, I quote Steven Pinker's distinction between kind of reality mindset and a mythology mindset. Most people are fairly rational. This is from his book, Rationality. Most people are fairly rational, and they can think clearly when it comes to reality worldview stuff. I got to keep gas in the tank and money in the bank, take the kids to school, keep my job, have a family, marriage, the whole, just kind of regular stuff. People are pretty rational. But those are the kinds of things they can kind of keep track of. But if it's something mythological, like did Jesus die for my sins, or, what's going on in this foreign country, or what's really happening, the deep state, how would I know? The election was rigged. How would I know if the election was rigged or not? I wouldn't even know who to call, right? How would I check that? I don't know. But that guy, he's the head of our tribe, our group. He says it, and they probably know. And I'm just going to go along with it because I have no way of knowing for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's certainly some of that. And it's just that, what we're seeing in the general kind of right-wing, radical right, spiritualized, through QAnon or whatever, is a lot of that stuff. And, Pentecostals have been very heavily involved with QAnon from the beginning, some, not all. Is again, it's just that, it's that intuition. It's people saying, I'm tired of being told that, the world's about to drown and all this kind of stuff. And it's just, going with your gut, and so I think it, just really is that anti-authority and anti-expertise. I mean, it depends, in terms of that January 6th stuff, how many people were there for the kind of performative aspect of it, and the fun and the transgressive, because it does seem to, if you're dressing up and all of that, like if you really, really thought that an election had been stolen and that this was the last moment for democracy or whatever you think is important. I mean, I don't think that you're, putting on face paint that morning. I think you were just, you're getting in there any way that you can. But I mean, obviously there were true believers in there as well. And, there were, and probably some people who maybe weren't at the best time in their life. They might have been having some dramas. One guy I write about in the book, I don't think he was, having a, maybe the best time with his mental health and things like that, that was there. And maybe it is that, kind of
the Viking, the shaman, the QAnon shaman guy.
Yeah. Oh no, not him. I think he was having the time of his life. Was he? I think it was like banging the gavel or doing something like that.
Right.
I mean, I think a lot of those people was kind of transgressive, but there was just another, kind of guy who'd been through some theological training with all these kind of Seven Mountains Mandate folks in Colorado Springs, and but I'm not sure if he was having a really great time in his life, and he kind of radicalized a bit, I think, as we see some people doing. But look, certainly I think if there's just this, there is a breakdown in trust, there is a breakdown in authority, there is a breakdown in what people accept to be true and all that kind of stuff. And again, I think this the wider that wider problem is well above my pay grade. But certainly this Pentecostal faith globally is speaking to a lot of people's distrust in the in the liberal secular world. And it's done some good things for people, but it's done a lot of bad things for other people as well. And they maybe just are going back to what they feel in their guts and in their hearts. And, that's certainly just can be hugely appealing to people, is just sort of saying, screw the material world. Let's just focus on the spiritual stuff. Let's focus on the one thing that we all believe in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was thinking about that Pizzagate and the Comet Ping Pong Pizzeria when that guy Edgar Welch went there with his gun to break up the pedophile ring that he thought was going on there. That is kind of what you would do if you really believed a crime was being committed and no one was doing anything about it. Hugo Mercier makes this point that, most people that said they believe it, what do you mean when you say you believe it? Because, maybe they went on Yelp and left a, 1-star review of the pizza place because the pizza was too doughy.
Yeah.
That's not what you would do if you really believed there was a pedophile ring going on.
Absolutely. And, sometimes you see these, some of these religious figures go a bit too far with the abortion thing and say, oh, we've got to hang all these women having abortions. And it's like, well, he's actually saying what's the logical conclusion. These people are out there, banging on about abortion and saying that, they're killing babies and killing full-term babies and stuff. And it's, well, if you actually believe that, you probably should say, you probably would say that these women, who are having abortions should be jailed or put to death. But very few people actually say it because we know that it's such a symbolic and kind of performative thing that's just obviously gotten out of, massively out of control now. But yeah, that's, it does tend to be these lone wolves who actually take action because they really do believe it. Whereas so many of the people who are inciting them, some pretty ugly kind of guys, in media and whatnot who are inciting them and profiting off it. I don't think that they believe it, or certainly not enough to restrict their own liberty.
More of a symbolic or mythological belief.
Yeah.
Just something our tribe believes, something like that. Okay, back to your 7 spheres: education, religion, family, business, government, arts and entertainment, media. So family. So here, let's talk about your chapter on the sex workers and the Johns, and the whole John program to rehabilitate these men and so on. This would, I guess, be in the family category of, what's the purpose of religion? It's to get you to get your shit together and, be a good, upstanding citizen and a good family person. What are you doing going to a prostitute? That's the problem, right?
Yeah. I'm not sure that any of these guys are necessarily looking at this mountain saying, yeah, this is what we're doing about it. But it certainly falls within that. This is also just a Texas thing. There was some laws passed under Governor Abbott a few years ago that really incentivized people to start these schools. And make no mistake, it is big business. It's basically, makes a what could potentially be a felony, a misdemeanor, I think. If it's your first time, that you can just plead guilty. You don't have to go through the court case. A lot of these guys are humiliated with those, mugshots on TV and all that kind of stuff, and, tend to lose their jobs and stuff anyway. But yeah, these schools can charge what they like. They get you in. So it's sort of like getting done for drink driving. You've got to sit there and, look through slides of all these horror shows of STDs and all that, which they ill-advisedly do just before lunch.
God.
And, they have former, sex workers who were, trafficked, who, come and speak and sort of tell horror stories and all that kind of stuff. They have, guys who come and talk about sex addiction and porn addiction and that kind of thing. But, most of them are just working class guys who, probably had 2 toddlers at home and are working 2 jobs and, just letting off some steam. It's pretty miserable, but this is Texas. And it's all been heavily criminalized. And I think that there still is genuinely a desire to save souls. But one of the really noticeable parts of the Pentecostal movement, and what we call the third wave now, so the neo-charismatic movement, it really is about transforming society. So they'd like to stop an abortion. They'd like to stop this guy from going back to a prostitute, but they really want to transform society. And I think that there is quite a punitive and a carceral kind of sensibility that is in a lot of this movement, that it's, this is how we think we should do things. And really wanting to pull people's morality into line, and their vices and whatnot. So I think that is quite a profound thing that's coming through the movement. And it's not just about, maybe helping just one local person who's a bit down on their luck or whatever. It's like, hang on, how can we transform our whole town? How can we all get together and do this? And, you get sheriffs coming in and local candidates and stuff who get really involved in this. And so that's really part of why I think Pentecostalism is so fascinating and in many aspects so dangerous, is that there is this highly political element to it. It's let's change the world. Let's change our little town and then our country and then the world. It's not just, have you been saved and let's dunk this guy in the pool. So yeah, I think that that's the really transformative aspect of it. It's the very notably Pentecostal aspect of it, and I think this real political moment that the movement is having is certainly something to be concerned
How
about.
come they're going after the Johns rather than the sex workers?
That's what the general policing has been for the last 10 or 20 years, is that you go after the buyers, not the sellers. I mean, they still do. It's a pretty miserable time being a sex worker in America, because you do get picked on by police a lot, because they know that, they know who's working where, and they can arrest them or they can give them a freebie. And so that tends to happen. There still are some. I mean, I did speak to one working girl in the Waco area for the story, and she said, one time she got caught in an FBI sting, and they were trying to say to her, oh, just tell us you've been trafficked, that you're a human trafficking victim, and we'll do all this stuff to you. And she's like, I've got a business. I'm putting myself through an MBA. I got 4 kids at home. Like, don't do this to me, sort of thing. She's like, I'm fine. If I've got to take a rap, I'll take a rap. But yeah, so that's just the general kind of global thing now is to police the buying, not the selling.
Interesting. So I'm just really bothered by that whole subject of, telling other people what they can and cannot do. Here I'm always hammering on conservatives because we're in favor of small government and individual liberty and autonomy and freedom. Okay, so the freedom of women to have their own reproductive choice. Well, not that. Freedom of gays to marry who they actually love. No, not that. It's like, oh, okay, so you're not actually in favor of freedom and autonomy and liberty, right? So
what's the expression? Freedom for me and not for thee.
Yeah, exactly. So, but why sex? I mean, religions have always been pretty obsessed with controlling sexuality, especially female sexuality. But here in this case, going for the buyers rather than the sellers. I don't know what's driving that.
One of the really notable things about the global Pentecostal movement is how female led it is. Females have always been able to preach in Pentecostal churches right from the beginning. So your Amy Semple McPherson's, they generally still are, male preachers with their, dutiful wife by the side, but the women do take a very active role, and often there is they do have these more perhaps community-minded ideas of how they want to spend their time, and they certainly do a lot of work with girls and stuff as well, and they do do a lot of inverted commas rescue stuff too. But yeah, there is a really noticeable movement, and it really is about these these women who have grown up, they're still part of the secular world, so they're in church, who still can be a bit old-fashioned with a lot of stuff, but these are often college-educated women, their own dreams and ambitions. And so the one thing that I do say is that they're, I suppose the distinction would be that they're anti-feminist, but they're pro-girl power. So they really do like taking on these sorts of causes that they do feel perhaps are a bit more female, really about female empowerment. And they would say, all of these, women are human trafficking victims, and we got to save them. And maybe the easiest way to do it is by stopping men from doing this. But they believe that, it's a problem that women and that the sisterhood can and should be turning towards.
Have you heard of this woman, Elle, Aella? She's the highest earner on OnlyFans, fans only, whatever that name is.
OnlyFans. Okay, yeah, I think I know the name. Yeah.
So she does, performance online basically, and also does some escorting work and stuff. But anyway, she was written up, I think, in Forbes or one of these magazines, making like $100,000 a month at her peak, right? So it's like, and so I saw a debate with her and Louise Perry, and I had Louise Perry on the show a few weeks ago. She wrote that book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. And basically, women, feminism has told women you can have sex like a man, carefree, all the partners you want, and you'll have no guilt or any shame, and you shouldn't feel bad, do whatever you want. So, and she goes, well, maybe that's not always the case. But this Aella woman was saying, mind your own business. I'm doing very well, thank you. I don't need somebody to tell me that I shouldn't be doing this, right? But the counter to that, I guess, is that there is sex trafficking. There are women who are abused in this system, right? So the law enforcement should do something to protect them.
Yeah, look, again, I'm not a specialist in this area, but I did a story on the QAnon Save Our Children movement that took off in the pandemic. And, sort of, yoga mums and stuff like that on Instagram getting really into it. And I interviewed a lady whose name escapes me, I think at the University of Michigan. and she's been working on child trafficking for 30 years, and she's often an expert witness in cases and things like that. And she said not one single time has she ever had involvement in a human trafficking case where it hasn't been, an immediate family member or, someone close to the family, the mother's partner or something like that. She said strangers just don't go up and pick, I'm sure there's an exception to everything, but strangers don't go out in the street and pick up, young women and sell them in. It's not like the Taken franchise with Liam Neeson. That doesn't happen.
At the Paris airport.
Yeah. And it's so that that kind of stuff. It's always within family networks and people that are known to people. So a lot of this stuff just really gets just completely blown out of all proportion.
A little bit like kidnapping. Like 99% of kids that are kidnapped by one of the parents in a divorce custody battle. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's the same with murder, isn't it? It's almost always someone that So I think unfortunately the anti-human trafficking movement has gotten quite out of control, and certainly unfortunately Pentecostals have had a fair bit to do with that.
Yeah. I'm kind of conflicted about this generally. I have libertarian views on the legalization of prostitution and drugs. I mean, much of the crime is crime because it's illegal. So where there's a demand for a free market of something and there isn't, then you get a black market. And that's where the criminal elements come in. On the other hand, a lot of drugs are dangerous and bad. We don't want a free market of fentanyl, say. And a lot of prostitution is conducted by sex workers who are just poor. And they don't want to do it. They're not making $100,000 a month on fans only, right? They're just trying to raise their kid as a single mom or whatever. And there's a lot of abuse. The Johns are abusive or the pimps are abusive. And therefore, maybe that would be too much to decriminalize it and regulate it like a business. I don't know. I go back and forth on this. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, this sex worker I spoke to in Waco, who was wonderful. She was a single mom at 15 and is putting herself through an MBA. She is she knows how the world works better than anyone, and she's a really good mom and just a really good human being. She said to me, she said, my options growing up in this small town and a single mum from 15, she said, I can be bagging groceries in Walmart for $7.25 an hour, or I can be doing this for $200 an hour. She's like, the economics. Right. She's like, I'm an idiot if I'm not I'm not listening to the economics on that. I guess that my general view would just be, if we have the welfare services so that people aren't forced to make these choices. Then ideally we wouldn't have these ideally people would be doing sex work if they wanted to do sex work. But that's obviously, I think unfortunately the United States is a long way from having those kind of adequate welfare services.
And what is your sense of why the guys are doing it? I mean, so you mentioned some of them had wives at home and kids, and is it just sexual variety, or they're frustrated at home or at work, or?
I didn't really interview that many people why, but I mean, the thing was that in these classes, all of the people who were caught in stings and stuff were very low income, came from low income areas. Around the time that I was working on this story, Robert Kraft, the New England's Patriots owner, was sort of caught in a sting in in a massage parlor in Florida, and he it looks like he got away with a real slap on the wrist and didn't have to go through this humiliation of a school like this. And so that's a lot of the guys that I spoke to were just they were just pretty pissed off that they were some of them it seemed to me to be a pretty open and shut case of entrapment in some cases by some pretty awful and bored local cops who were just trying to rack up some numbers for the night or something like that. So I think it was just the real injustice of it, that the people who are being put through, the really onerous costs, they can have their cars impounded if they don't pay the fee for the John School. Sometimes we're talking $2,000 a pop. That's a huge amount of money, in a small town in Texas when you're just, when you're, driving a truck or something like that. And so it just has these ongoing ramifications for your livelihood. And it's it's, I don't imagine that many members of the Epstein network who were, on the private jets and things like that have had to go to John schools, we'll put it that way.
No, they're not. Yeah, I really hate that though. Just, why is it somebody else's business? I guess if you believe that politically we can't have a civil society just with law and order, you need some internalization of moral values, and that's the role of religion.
Yeah, I mean, it's just ultimately, yeah, there is just that busybody element, for want of a better term, that just says that, yeah, we believe this, and everyone else is going to adhere to it. And like I said, I think that's just a really important takeaway to really understand how the Pentecostal movement is really going over and above, what your old school, even Billy Graham's and Jerry Falwell's were really that into. I mean, they sort of started laying the ground for this, but it's full transformation of society. It's not just trying to get some extra people in the tent before Judgment Day. There really is that profound sense that the liberal secular world is closing in on us. We need to make all these changes. Everything's going to hell. It is, on in the one hand, very optimistic, but there certainly is an overarching sense of doom and gloom that does seem to be a strong motivator for people, and for people in these positions of power who, are often making a lot of money, who have huge Facebook audiences to preach from, and sell all these books and all that kind of stuff. There is, saying that everything's doom and gloom and Hillary Clinton's going to eat your children and stuff. I mean, that obviously sells.
Yes.
And
Right.
so it's, the people who have the incentive to motivate other people just really, really want profound change, and it's not at an individual level.
Yeah. Right. Because there's a sense that although we're autonomous, individual, sentient beings, we're also social and part of a collective called society or the nation state or whatever. And government can only do so much. So you need some other structure. So this is one of the arguments for the value of religion. And I do try to see the value of religion, even, as an atheist, it plays a really important role in a lot of people's lives. Okay. Oh, so here's one of the other books I read in college: Varieties of Religious Experience by William
Of
James.
course.
Right?
Of course.
There's a lot of variety of religious experiences that people have. We have to acknowledge that. So I've been thinking about this recently with the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. What is it that people see in him? Because he's not traditionally religious at all. I mean, maybe he's religious light, or he has some adjacent to some Christian values or something like that. But it seems to be, this appeal of young people to his message, the 12 rules for life. And here's 12 more. And a lot of people seem to just have never heard these things, or they're like, oh my God, this changed my life. He's always posting on Twitter. And he just posted one this morning about, some letter from some guy. You changed my life. Just like what we were talking about earlier. I was drinking, I was on drugs, I left my wife and lost my job. And then I read Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life. And oh my God, I'm just trying to get in to see his talk. Yeah, that's right. I made my bed, cleaned my room. I work out every day. And I'm just hoping to get into his next talk. I hope it doesn't sell out before I get a ticket. And like, oh my God, this is like an evangelical thing, right? So there's something there that's deeper, I think, that's really, that your Pentecostalism and religion in general taps into.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, yeah, people are, this is alienation, right? Everyone's, was already feeling pretty alienated and awful. And then we all spent, was it like a year or so just indoors on the computer, and that's not good for anyone. And so, yeah, I think definitely having that. And I mean, I really have wondered if, because it did seem to be a phenomenon that young men were really into with Jordan Peterson. And is it just that it's someone on the computer telling you to do this and not your parents? Is it that you don't have any exposure to, males outside your peer group, anymore, that maybe you don't play football anymore, so you don't have a football coach to kind of tell you to come on time and tuck your shirt in and this is how you get a girlfriend kind of thing. That maybe people just, I think people don't have those connections and those networks as much anymore. So, a guy that can deliver, sort of an impassioned YouTube speech with a bit of, kind of escalating music in the background, like the Pentecostals do, that maybe it has that kind of effect on people. And, these are, I mean, we all are, but, just, imagine people that are quiet online and the other thing I really have noticed with Pentecostals that does feel a bit similar to the Peterson movement was I think a lot of people come to this stuff in the dark hours, when you're searching around on YouTube and kind of going through the recommended algorithms or on Facebook or whatever. It's not necessarily, while you're in the middle of your day, just trying to get paid to do your job. It often is at 2 a.m. when you can't sleep and you've got a bit on your mind and that kind of stuff. And I think that really has an effect on people. It's that time when you're alone and there isn't much else going on. And so I certainly think it is part of an overall kind of issue that we have now with kind of alienations and there's sort of crumbling communities and people just looking to get just advice and an arm around the shoulder in any way that you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mentioned my buddy Michael Coles, the guy that ran against Newt Gingrich. He was friends with Isaac Hayes, the great singer, and also chef on South Park.
Yeah, of course.
And he won the what is it for Theme from Shaft was his big song that he won the award for. At any rate, so he was there, and he had just famously kind of become an outed Scientologist. Okay. And and of course this is one of my things, to study cults and things like that. Of course, I didn't say, hey, why did you join a cult? Because no one joins a cult, right? They join a group they think is going to be helpful. And that's what he said. He said, look, Michael, here's the deal. I hit the pinnacle of fame and money and everything in Hollywood, and then I lost it all, alcohol, drugs, the whole thing. And then Scientology helped me. They got me out and changed my life. My career's back. And it's like, what do you say to that other than, well, yeah, that's good. I'm happy for you.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I suppose the next question is how much did you give them? But
yes, well, yes.
Yeah, it is.
I didn't ask that.
I have a lot of time for people who join these churches and these movements, because I think it's probably good that people are looking to spend more time together and less time online and looking to form strong communities and stuff like that. I mean, there's indisputable evidence that this stuff is good for us, speaking to other people and not just being on our phones all the time. So often this is good. It's just, unfortunately, sometimes it's not always led by the best people or those with the best intentions.
Yeah. So I had a guy named Massimo Piccolucci on my show just recently, and he wrote a book on Stoicism. So he's an atheist. Yeah. I'm an atheist. Both of us have been involved in the skeptical, atheist, humanist communities for decades. And the sense used to be like back, say, in the 80s and 90s, and then particularly after Dawkins' phenomenon with the new atheists in the early aughts. If religion falls into disuse and there is no more religion, we talk them all out of it because everyone's a rational being. Right. Anyway, let's just say that happened. Don't we have to replace it with something? I mean, what would it be? So, for Massimo, Stoicism is this ancient Greek philosophy, is kind of a philosophy for life, living your life in a practical way. Although I can't imagine hundreds of millions of people joining Stoicism as a philosophy, but something like that. We need some kind of structure, and religion has always played that role more than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of from a sociological aspect, I think that it's religion, will always be there. It's very clearly, just a lot of organizing principles and a lot of codification of, when you think about like kosher laws and burial laws and things like that, well, yeah, it makes sense because you're in the desert. And a lot of this stuff is just codifying wisdom. But yeah, and trying to, I think there's a lot of, I go through phases of, sort of getting into biblical teachings and stuff like that. And sometimes it is, nice to be reminded of the golden rule and that, maybe people should look after our neighbors and stuff like that. I'm totally fine with it being around. I suppose it's just some of the, as I mentioned, some of the political aspects and those telling people what to do aspects of it that I'm not a huge fan of. But if it gets people motivated to do stuff in their communities and spend more time around other people, I think that there's a good chance it might be doing some good.
Yes, indeed. All right, before we hit the 2-hour mark here, and thank you for your patience. I did want to ask you what it's like in Korea, North Korea, right? You went to North Korea.
Yeah.
So what's that like?
North Korea, gosh, I was there was it 2014 or 15? I can't remember which. But yeah, it's so I'm not sure how dated this is. It was very bizarre, and it was actually, kind of quite alienating in a lot of ways. I found the sensory deprivation really strange. I mean, it's great because you can't use your phones there. So you kind of, you can feel your brain sort of grow over the course of a week when you're not on your phone the whole time. But yeah, just the silence, the empty roads, the complete darkness at night. all that kind of stuff was really quite strange. The fairly tasteless food. You can't go anywhere. If you went to the bathroom in a museum, your tour guide's waiting for you outside the bathroom. The only place where you could have some freedom was in your hotel at night in the capital. So then, often the only thing to do there is go to the bar. So you wind up drinking far too much beer, although they do have quite good beer and soju.
Really?
Yeah. They nationalised the Scottish brewery when we were staying in Pyongyang, and actually, my group was one of the first people to ever go through like a proper Korean like workers' bar where they kind of save up their tokens from the week, and that was really fun. And again, really good beer. 1 through 7, so light through to like your Guinness is kind of a 7.
That's funny.
And and about 50 cents a pop as well. So it was
Wow.
it was good. But the whole thing was very bizarre. Quite, there's a lot of performative stuff. There's the gorgeous girls kind of dolled up coming out at every meal singing this song. But I mean, you have to have a male and a female guide. I think that there's 2 of them for every 10 of you. And the female guide we had was very clearly, she'd been to China and stuff when she was young. To deal with Westerners, you've got to be fairly a member of, fairly elite family. I think her father was, diplomat or something like that. And she got it, that her world was just completely alien and different. But the male guy, he was a bit older, and he was, one night they got everyone to sing a song from their country, and he started weeping as he kind of sang one of those grand patriotic tunes. And he was fully in. So it was quite bizarre, it was a fascinating experience. I'd like to, I don't know if I'd necessarily go back in a hurry, because once you've kind of seen, everything's all for show. So you're not actually really getting to see life. But I did meet and interview some North Korean refugees in South Korea. And because, it's only the Pentecostals that are running the Underground Railroad to get out.
Really?
Through China. Yeah, I have a chapter in the book on it. So through China and potentially parts of North Korea, there's a huge Pentecostal movement in South Korea, and they get a lot of money from Korean American evangelicals and American evangelicals, and they're sort of the only ones, once again, true believers, often will tend to be the only ones that do this, because they really do want to save souls and help bring down communism, and Pentecostal faith is heavily involved with the anti-communist movement in South Korea, because Pentecostal was known as the Jerusalem of the East until the Kim dynasty came in. So all these Christians fled over the border when they sort of saw the writing on the wall. So they're very, very strong within the anti-communist movement. And to this day, the best way of getting out of North Korea is through the Pentecostal Underground Railroad and through house churches in China. Hugely risky. Pretty grim unless you've got a church sponsoring you with a lot of money. And then once people get to Seoul, it's this huge cosmopolitan technological city, and just a world away from their life in North Korea. A huge amount of North Korean refugees want to go home because they just get to the city, they feel alienated, they can't get a good job. People say their accent's funny, they speak in a really strange dialect. And life's pretty grim for them once they get over there. And once again, it's the churches who do tend to provide a fair amount of relief. But then, it sort of comes with a degree of humiliation. They call it showing your face. So you can go around to all the big evangelical churches, get your food package, get some clothes. There'll be a dentist there who'll look at your teeth for free, that kind of thing. And that's often what a lot of North Korean refugees in the South are reduced to, is spending their Sundays going around to all the different churches, getting all of their, sort of little aid and money packages for showing up. Just making a life, in a pretty menial job, with no family and very few friends. It's pretty grim.
Wow. So remember when the Soviet Union fell, and there were all these statistics from sociologists, religion's on the march again in Russia. But then there was a kind of a debate about to what extent it ever really disappeared. It just goes underground because it's illegal. It's officially an atheist state. Do you think that's what's happening in North Korea? You think people are privately religious?
They may have some sort of spirituality. I think North Koreans are really into astrology, apparently.
Really? Oh, wow.
Yeah. There was one of the people I interviewed in the book said that, their family was still kind of very silently practicing, and you can often get radio transmissions from Christian broadcasting stations that are doing stuff. So there'll certainly be some people that are practicing privately. But I severely doubt that there'd be underground churches or anything like, for example, there are in China. There are house churches and things like that going on. I really strongly doubt that there would be in North Korea, but maybe there is.
You've seen those videos when Kim Jong-il died, right? The father of Kim Jong-un, right? And there's those videos of people just sobbing and weeping in the streets. I mean, for days, and it's just like, come on. Does anybody really believe this is real? This is a show, right? And I mean, the people know they're faking, I think, and the regime has to know they're faking, but no one wants to say anything. No one wants to say the emperor has no clothes, right? Because it kind of carries on.
I mean, I think some people would have that, genuinely feel it. They're, told their whole life that this is, the most important person in the world and this, godlike figure, and they do use a lot of traditional Korean mythology and even Christianity. I mean, he was the son of a Pentecostal, grandson of a Pentecostal pastor. So he used to, go to Sunday school and everything. So they, I mean, there certainly are those, like anything, I think there would be some people that truly believe it, and other people it's just a performative thing. It's just what you do. And then, you don't have any, the lady who runs your apartment building saw that you went out to the funeral or whatever, and then you come back and get on with life. I think, for the most part, people probably just want to make their lives easier, and I certainly don't begrudge them that.
Yeah, maybe more generally, if you actually believe what you're doing and it's not just a performance, you'll have a better performance. You will do it better. And so maybe deep in the Pentecostal religious performances, the people actually really do believe, and the whole thing gets carried further along by that kind of more, commitment to the belief.
Yeah, look, and I think people do, there often is a genuine desire to be a part of something bigger than yourself in whatever it is, whether it's Jordan Peterson or the North Korean regime or religion. And so people, maybe deep down, they're not, it's not the most deeply held belief, but sometimes it's just nice to be a part of something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a new book just came out called Awe, Dak Keltner, the psychologist at UC Berkeley. And he talks about this, that, religion is not the only way to get this, that sense of something bigger, grander than you that takes you out of your ego. Usually it comes if you're out in the woods near big trees, or you're up on a cliff with an ocean, that kind of thing. And that, there is kind of, so he argues that this is a deep human emotion that must be met. And if religion's not going to do it, then where are we going to get it? Right. Well, there are different ways to get it, but it's there.
Yeah, no, I think it's certainly an important question, and something that certainly secular-minded people do need to consider. And also, again, just with the Pentecostal experience, it's very, talk so much about the material stuff because it's just probably more the where I'm coming from. And it is, hugely, profoundly spiritual movement as well. But just also getting out of the day-to-day is like, I think just so much, sometimes we just underestimate how much, most people in the world, most of their lives like really suck. Like working in a really thankless, like 14-hour day factory where you've got, your boss is an asshole and you're just commuting across Sao Paulo in 2 hours of traffic and smog, and your life is really miserable, and just getting away from that is, into something transcendental and something bigger than yourself is really important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Most of our lives are pretty just regular and routine, and there's not that much excitement to it. So yeah, that's the appeal of it. All right, Elle, thanks so much for coming on the show to talk. What are you working on now? What's your next, what crazy foreign country are you going to next?
So I'm actually about to return to Ethiopia. I spent a bit of time there last year.
You are? What are you doing there?
They got a Pentecostal prime minister, and they've just had a ceasefire in the war up north, which was a absolutely horrendous civil war. But yeah, just got a bit of just got a bit going on there. So we shall see. I've got a really interesting story on a Pentecostal group in Arizona coming out in The Guardian soon.
Right. Oh, nice.
Yeah, some spiritual deliverance practices, which are a bit unusual. So yeah, keep an eye out for that. And I've got a few bits and pieces coming, and just working on some top secret projects that hopefully will be revealed later this year.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, those healings, you hear about those, that they're happening. So I'm always curious because I want to know what's actually true. Are they being healed by placebo effect? Is there something else going on? Were they not really sick, or it was a temporary thing? I don't know. There's a good Netflix series you should watch called Miracle. Darren Brown. He's a magician and an illusionist, and he actually does some just amazing stuff with just kind of selective hypnosis of he's kind of worked the audience and picked out the most susceptible people. They come up on stage, and he has them doing pretty much everything faith healers do. It's pretty impressive. So I've been giving some thought to this. To what extent are these preachers kind of adopting some of these techniques that illusionists and magicians use and hypnotists use? Not intentionally, maybe they've kind of just accidentally stumbled into what works on their particular audience.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. There is some science that goes into it. Is a bit of placebo effect, which we know works. There is a bit of self-delusion. There is a bit of charlatanism, and there is a bit of healing. I do write about in my book. I do believe that there are some people that have been healed by this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, they've been healed. Maybe, or maybe so I would say medicine is not a perfect science. We don't know why. Some people just get better. They just do. The cancers do go into remission, some small percentage. And so it could be something like that. Yeah, interesting. Well, Absolutely. I'll look forward to reading that. All right, Elle, thank you.